Welcome to another episode of A Come Together. Welcome back. We have another solo episode today, which I think is good. I think we had a good, healthy ratio recently of solo episodes to guest episodes, which I'm very happy about. I did 3 guest episodes in a row, which I was not thrilled about, but 3 solo episodes in a row, which I wasn't thrilled about, but there wasn't really much I could do. And when there's not much when the situation is out of your hands, the only thing you can do is kind of make the most of what's in your hands. And so at the time, the best that I was able to do or offer up at the moment was 3 solo episodes. But I'm very happy. Bounced back with 5 guest episodes. Max Cantor. This is, I think, second or third time doing the podcast. I think the third time doing it with me. He was awesome. We talked about whether internships should be paid, especially if it's while you're of working age and actually providing the value of, what it is that you're doing. So, for example, in his case, we were talking about teaching, and, he essentially spent a big part of his college career working as a teacher, lesson planning, grading, being in the classroom, dealing with, a full load of students, and he had to pay to do that. He had to go into student debt to do that, and then to ultimately get all the certifications and everything like that. It's even more expensive. And so we were talking about unpaid internships, and we talked about some of the concepts of ways, or I guess the methods and tools we can use to kind of tackle having difficult conversations with family and friends. And I've been working on that for myself too. I feel like as time goes on, and as I find that very little driven um, has driven direct change in my perspective and personality and behaviors and consciousness. Nothing has had as significant a change, I think, in my life as becoming a dad, and wanting to do it well. And it just really changes the way that I think about things, I look at things, my relationship to other people, my relationship to myself, my relationship my relationship to my time, and and how intentional I am about things I never really thought I had to consider, responsibilities I never had to consider before. And just a lot happens very quickly. And one of the things we talk about is that if your values change and you're talking to close friends and family, what's some of the best ways to go about that? And so he talks from his own personal experience, which he has a great deal of, excuse me, so it's definitely worth listening to. We then, I then sat down with the gentleman Paul Levine, who's awesome, and he has a great story. He produces one of the largest music festivals around the country every year called Suwannee Halloween, with some of the greatest bands around, including String Cheese Incident. And I think there's a jam section, and then there's an electric music section of the festival, and then there's the typical arts and typical booths and all these fun kind of non-conventional. They used to call them head shops, I guess, but these are kind of like traveling booths that are offering different cool, fun things. And we talk about how he got into that. We talk about his career promoting music and putting live music events together. Then at some point in his life in the throughout the 90s, he lived in Aspen, Colorado, before it became what Aspen is today, which is just a very wealthy, I'm not gonna say just, but it's a very wealthy ski town, very exclusive. And if you're walking through town, you're either gonna have, above 60-year-old, generally left-leaning, wealthy corporate professionals, and then the other percentage of the demographic is pretty much young, hipster, hippie, snowboarders, or nature junkies, and it's a really cool mix and really cool vibe. But that whole ski town area used to be a little bit more, we'll call it grounded or down to earth, and this was when Hunter S. Thompson was living there. I don't know the years that he was mayor of the town, but but apparently, he and Paul Levine were good friends, and so we talked a little bit about Hunter S. Thompson and how he became friends with him, and what the live music scene at the time in that part of the world was, and he kind of also breaks down. It's really cool that there's different jam music bands that are popular based on regions of the country. So the Northeast, the Southwest, Southeast, Northwest, Central. Colorado always has kind of its own thing. And so that was really cool. That was a lot of fun. And if you're a music fan, it's really cool to hear him talk about all these kind of experiences and all these bands, and just his experience putting all this stuff together. Then we had Courtney Barnes, who was one of my favorite episodes I think I've recorded so far. And she is a very accomplished, very intelligent, and very mature lawyer who works on drug policy reform. And she just has an amazing story. Her episode is a beautiful combination of technical information, how laws happen, how decriminalization happens, federal versus state. Talking about law school rather, talking about her decisions, why to go to law school, why not to. Well, she did, but why she went, and ultimately what was driving her. And then we talk about her healing journey through psychedelics, and rediscovering herself, um, and kind of understanding and coming to terms with the different parts of our personalities, and there are parts that we think that are us in our lives that are not really us. They're kind of reactions to experiences that kind of take on a life of their own based on us, and we can kind of separate ourselves from them. And we're talking about using psychedelics as part of that healing process, which was really, really just beautiful and emotional and really, really wonderful. And we had Dr. Ruth Muda, who I'm friends with. I've been friends with her and her husband for many years. Intermittently in touch, but always on good terms. I know her husband from probably 15 years ago from camp. He was one of my first friends in sleepaway camp when I flew halfway across the country. I didn't know anyone, and her husband was one of the first people I became friends with in that camp, and we go through a great episode where we talk about her journey becoming a doctor, psychology, and family medicine, not family medicine, family therapy, forensic therapy, and then ultimately perinatal, which is all the processes that have to do with the pregnancy experience or cycle. So pre-pregnancy, during pregnancy, God forbid if anything happens during the pregnancy, and then postpartum, all I guess fall into that category of women's health or women's emotional and mental health that she helps provide support for. And it's just we talk about her own experience going through grad school, having a family, or starting to have a family while she was defending her dissertation, and then just her experience throughout time, and kind of probing into different aspects of different types of psychology that she practiced in. So that was really great. And then finally, good old Remy Kroll, Charles Remy Kroll, my buddy, who's, I think this is probably his seventh or eighth time on the podcast, maybe more. He's been on a bunch, and I honestly, those are kind of just those are fun, what's up, shoot the shit kind of podcasts. Catch up on each other's lives, talk about what's on our minds, and that was more of a mixed bag, but still a lot of fun. Um, so that's just catching up on the last five guests that have happened. If you haven't listened to any of them and any of them sound interesting, then by all means, go check them out. Go check them out if you like it. Share it if you like it. So, click subscribe or 5 stars, whatever it is. It always helps. It helps a ton. And I am going to have to start taking things up a notch with this podcast to start to continue building. And I've been it's actually a weird middle ground at this point for someone like myself in the development of this podcast, because I've hit this weird middle ground where I have talked to a lot of fun and random people that I've never, I've obviously never met, and people that do a whole lot of different things with their lives and their careers, people from different backgrounds. And I've kind of made my way at this point through moderately to moderately slash on the path to like legitimate, I guess, being the top of their. When I say success, I don't want to say success like financially, just success in terms of building whatever it is that these people care to build and succeeding in whatever they're passionate about. Those are the kind of people I want to talk to, just the people that are good at what they do and good at what they love. And so, I'm starting to reach out to people that are more quote unquote successful or more accomplished or have a little bit more of a established history. So, for example, instead of reaching out to someone that does casting at something, at, let's say, Warner Brothers, I'm reaching out to someone that's the head of the casting studio. And, on one hand, I have enough guests that I can really share that, hey, I have a lot of legitimacy with the guests that I have and the people that I've talked to. And on the other hand, I'm not big enough yet that I think a lot of them would even necessarily bite with that bait. And so you just have to keep on working at you have to keep on working on the sales game and just keep it going. And I find actually, so there's like, I think I spent a week and a half being extremely aggressive about it. And it got a lot of great results. And then I burned out. And, I mean, this is a story of my life and really everyone's life. But, even though, and I've talked about this before, even though I love doing work for this podcast, the work that doesn't come naturally, I force myself to do. I make my way through, but then I eventually end up getting a little burnt out, and it's tough. Those weeks are tough because you're supposed to be doing something, and um, and you're not doing it. And on one hand, yeah, you got to recharge your batteries, and you got to give yourself time to go through it. And not even that, you could still be productive, just in another way. I mean, the weeks that I'm not reaching out to people, I should be reading more. I should be learning more. I should be listening to more podcasts. I should be playing more music or practicing more music or learning new songs or hanging out with people and getting experiences to continue talking about and writing about. And that's just as important, if not more important, than doing the reach out work, right? You have to have, like my teacher always said, you have to have 50 things you like more than writing or than, I guess, journalism or whatever. You have to have the things that you actually want to journal about or write about or talk about. So I got to keep up the time to do that. I can't do both. One of the books that I have been reading that has really been blowing me out of the water. And I've listened to this guy now. I guess he's in the middle of doing, I guess, the podcast circuit, because he was on Huberman and Rogan. Was this gentleman, Josh Waitzkin, and this guy's awesome. He actually reminds me. He reminds me very, very, very strongly of my friend Yosef Sirkez. He and I did a couple episodes together. I think he's one of the first podcast I ever recorded, and then one of the first podcasts I ever recorded, and then we did, I think, one relatively recently. He loves to travel, and he likes the whole Eastern type of world, religion. I don't know about religion, but philosophy. And 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 there's just a way that both of them, a certain very measured and an intentional way of speaking and carrying themselves, that's really, really very attractive. And I don't mean attractive in like a physical sense, obviously. I mean attractive in the sense that you trust this person because you could see that they're being thoughtful. You trust their advice because you could tell that they've seriously sat and contemplated it. And you could trust their words because you could tell that they're considering them before they open their mouths. And I think that as people, we have a tendency to appreciate or trust or be attracted to people that seem intentional and thought out because it shows sophistication. It shows that they have a large set of tools in whatever kind of sense, whether it's vocabulary, ability to express themselves, physical confidence. They have a set of tools that in any kind of chaotic event that occurs, and actually, Rami and I were talking about this yesterday, that, whether or not people like chaos and how people like chaos. And one of the things about chaos that people don't like is the feeling that they may not be equipped to handle the issues that are about to occur or that may occur. And there are people that do like chaos, don't feel comfortable enough with themselves that they could handle different degrees of the potentially unknown happening to them. And so if I were to say to you, how comfortable do you feel having to physically defend yourself and your boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, and you say, I feel pretty confident, but like, eh, which is probably the honest answer, then you probably don't have a lot of experience with a lot of physically engaged or confrontational experiences like sports or like fighting or like weight training and stuff. And why are people so people are attracted to the people that seem sure of themselves and intentional because, oh, I have the skill set and the potential tools available to me to really be able to handle whatever's about to come up, and I'll be okay. So there's something about this guy, Josh Waitzkin, that really just strikes you as incredibly, incredibly comfortable. And, so I listened to him speak on Huberman's podcast, and I was blown away. I was blown away by a number of things, by the information for sure. I was blown away by how digestible and how eloquent he was, and how he was able to kind of take ideas, especially regarding things that I don't know anything about. I don't play chess. I don't kind of, I don't really do any kind of form of martial arts or physical or physical fighting to know enough about what he's talking about when it comes to anything related to martial arts. I don't know anything about surfing or foiling. I don't know about coaching. I guess I know a little about about teaching, but so I don't know about anything that he is an expert in. And despite that, listening to his podcast, I really felt like I was able to. He would the concepts and the ideas were so clearly and eloquently put that the example that he's using to explain the concept is irrelevant to me because he put the pieces together so well and set things up that if you that just by listening to him you can understand what the values are. So I mean that's something that obviously is both rare, it's special, and when something like when you come across someone like that, at least in my book, you go and you find out if they published anything, and you read it, and you get a physical copy of whatever it is that is going to be able to, that this guy put thoughts to words and put it on paper, and we have an opportunity to read it and learn from it. it's almost certainly going to be something worthwhile to read. So I got the book, and so far it is not. It's so far from a disappointment. Actually, so what happened was I've been reading it, and when I start to read books that I know are going to be a little thicker or going to be a little bit more, are going to require a little bit more thought to consume the information. It requires a little bit more thoughtfulness. I'll usually read it with a pen and then underline or bracket or star certain points, or maybe write some thoughts in the you know in the margins of the page. And so I started reading the first chapter of the book, and I'm like, there's a lot that I'm highlighting, and there's a lot of really great short put sentences that are essentially just lessons. And so I said, oh, maybe I'll start to keep track of the lessons on the front cover of the book. So I'm going through the book, and everything that's kind of jumping out as an important lesson, I'm starting to write. And I'm in the first chapter of the book, and I'm like halfway down the whole front cover of the book. I'm halfway through the first chapter, and halfway down the first cover with just all these valuable ideas and notions. And I wanted to talk about them a little bit and elaborate on them a little bit, at least in some kind of relevant way that is easily applicable too, so that you listening, or you sharing, or you with your experience could be like, oh, that totally makes sense. First of all, the first thing that he says, and what he calls his main area of study or field of study or field of expertise, is a concept called interconnectedness. And it's essentially, there are certain traits or ideas or perspectives that kind of shoot through everything. So, for example, the notion of observing and studying and awareness of your weaknesses. That's something that it's just an idea, and it's a very important lesson, and it's an important lesson or a value in anything that you do, right? Whether for example, I'm a writer, or like to consider myself a writer, and one of the things that come very naturally for me is just creative imagery and details, and in short spurts of chaotic, fun, loud, and detail-oriented words and images. And I'm not really good at the whole editing process. And it would make me a lot better to force myself to be a good editor and to take a step back, and then probably somewhere along the way I'm going to have to ask myself the question, why don't I like editing? Is it just natural? Is it the attention to detail that bothers me? Is it that I have a hard time getting out of my mindset, and kind of putting myself in a different frame of mind to observe, how this would look to someone else? And all these things are all true and all relevant. Like, to me, that those are all things that I struggle with. And to and but chances are that this interconnectedness through interconnectedness, I don't just have to apply that to writing, I can apply that to guitar playing too, where I learn to look at my weakness. What's my weakness in guitar playing? My weakness might be, to learn new rules once I already have enough skills, or enough knowledge to be fine to learn new rules or to learn new skills that'll take me up a notch. And so that's my weakness, right? My weakness is being comfortable with where I am on the instrument. And what I'll do to compensate for that is I'll add more songs and music and variety to my repertoire. So I am always kind of building on what I know. I am growing, but I'm not growing to the fullest extent and the greatest extent that I could. And so so and then obviously the same thing applies with sales and with teaching and with being a dad and being a husband and being a son. And this notion of interconnectedness um, is the study of certain principles that are always good for everything. It doesn't make a difference what you apply, how you apply it. And it's kind of interesting because otherwise we kind of get stuck in just doing the things that we're good at, and we kind of become one dimensional. And it's really interesting to see how that happens. And I don't. I hope that this isn't. I guess processed or perceived as some kind of insult. I really don't mean for it to be. But last night, my friends and I went to I went with a group of probably 5 or 6 friends to see Ari Shafir play here in Hollywood, in Fort Lauderdale. He played at the Improv here. And, first of all, that whole experience was awesome. It was really, really interesting because this is the first time that I went to see a comedian that I, know of and I've heard his or her stand up before in a smaller venue or setting. So I mean, the improv in Dania Point is, I mean, there's probably room for couple hundred people, at most, maybe that, maybe 4 or 5, maybe 400 or 500, if that. Um, and obviously it was sold out, and there's a couple of shows per night, but the whole environment is much close. It's much more intimate. It's much more personal. It's groups of people being placed around, tables or bars, and then the comedians talking while everyone's kind of hanging out with their drinks in front of them. And it's a totally different environment than going to a comedian playing in, a stadium or a theater. So for example, I went to Tom Segura a couple months ago, and he played at the Hard Rock, which is a 7,000 person theater or stadium, and home to rock acts, comedy acts, music acts, magicians, and lots of fun and talented people. But 7,000 people is still pretty big, and it's a totally different environment. It kind of becomes about a performance. A club is a comedy club, at least just the way that we felt about it, I think, or the way that I felt about it, was a lot more intimate and kind of a little bit more of, it almost felt like an exchange of an experience, in the sense that when Tom Segura is speaking to the crowd at the Hard Rock in Hollywood, if he's speaking to a crowd in the Hard Rock and the 7,000 people, it's him giving a performance. But when you're in a small, intimate setting and anyone kind of talking could be heard, any kind of noise or heckling could just kind of, throw him off. It's a little bit more of a dance between the performer and the crowd, where the performer really has to feel out the room, put his finger on kind of the pulse on like which part of the room is responding to what jokes are doing well, what jokes aren't, when to build on when to build on the joke, if and of course that kind of the same skill set applies when you're at a giant theater, in for example, again, in the Hard Rock, or if you're in Madison Square Garden, or you're in one of those bigger venues. But it requires a similar amount of skills, but there's a lot less of that direct feedback. At that point, the crowd is sitting and silent and paying attention no matter what. Like, they paid a lot of money to come see you. You're in a giant place. There's thousands and thousands of other people there with you, and everyone's there for the same reason, to hear what this comedian has to say. With a comedy club, it's a little different. It just feels like there's a little bit more give and take, a little bit more input from the audience as to what the actual product's going to be. So that's just a side thought on the whole small venue versus large venue. But one thing I noticed about Ari Shafir, and for anyone that doesn't know his story, he's obviously deliberately and pretty intentionally, but also probably naturally, kind of iconoclast. He doesn't play by, and he kind of rejects any kind of social societal norms, or a lot of them rather. So he rejects religion in God, which I totally understand. I understand the system in the world that he kind of grew up in, and what would cause him to kind of not like that and to veer away from it and to feel displaced and unsettled by it. Then you see in his relationship to social media and politics, where where he refuses to engage, and a lot of and I'm not saying these are bad things. These aren't bad things by any means, but and rather not but these aren't bad things. They're also indicative of there's also a kind of common theme shooting through his content and through his life, and that theme is a very difficult theme to kind of build some kind of long lasting, I think, happiness and value from, which is if you go around rejecting everything, then kind of what are you building, what are you doing, and maybe and if part of what he's building, which is his performing, which is his act, which is the way he earns his living and makes money. If part of that living is built on the back of rejecting everything and kind of, I'm not going to participate in this, and this is all stupid, and I'm not participating in that, and that's stupid. On one hand, it's very funny. He's really, really smart. He comes up with some really, really clever and intelligent lines and bits and jokes, and he has really, really great commentary too. Like, it's interesting to hear what he has to say about the world and society, but I think to live in his own head and to kind of just look at everything like that, I don't know. I can't. I don't imagine that that it would necessarily be kind of what I'm looking for, or at least not. I can't imagine that it'd be a way to live a very happy life, to focus on what how you're rejecting everything. And by the way, I hope he's happy. I would love for him to be happy, and I hope that that he has his things that he builds and contributes to. And I don't know anything about his life on a regular basis, so except for whatever he talks about on a couple of podcast episodes a couple of times a year, and whatever his stand-up bits are about. So I hope he's doing well. It's just, but this concept of but I think the reason I wanted to talk about it was that this kind of interconnectedness is something that also happens on a micro scale in our own lives, right? So just like there are universal principles that kind of shoot through everything, we also have kind of personality traits, I believe, that shoot through everything in our lives, and then we notice these patterns that of behavior that we engage in. So I think that it's really, really important to be aware for ourselves on a personal level what what's interconnecting through our personalities and through our habits and through the way that we live, and then it's also important to study the actual interconnected concepts that exist outside that help us work on ourselves and help us kind of reestablish and realign what traits constantly push through our personalities. And I think that could be done. I think that there's two forms of development, and this is another thing that Josh Waitzkin talks about in the book. There's the concept of learning, which is I'm studying things and now I know things. I remember more dates. My brain has come retains more information than it used to. My associations are sharper and more widespread. Right? I could create I could create new and strong associations with different sets of information that I didn't always have access to. Excuse me. And then there's actual development, which is kind of what I was talking about, I think, a little bit earlier when I say that the things that I care about as I become a father are totally different than things I cared about even a year, 2, 3 years ago. And the things that I care about, the way that I care to spend my time, and the way that I think about things, my perspective and my values, and who I spend what time with, and how I choose to spend my time doing what, what with who, all that kind of changes, and the way that we carry ourselves, the way we express ourselves, the type of communication and relationships that we have, all that goes into development, which is not the same thing as learning. And you can kind of tell what the difference is. The other, a couple of days ago, there was a podcast. Last week, I think, it was released. There was a podcast on Diary of a CEO, and there was an emergency debate. I don't know why it was an emergency, but it was an emergency debate, and it was between two obviously very successful and very intelligent people. And one of the guys, you can tell that he had learned a lot and had not developed a lot, because the way that he was going about the debate was, quite frankly, extremely rude. He would take points, take bits and pieces of what the person he was debating against, take bits and pieces of their points, specifically reframe them out of context, use them to insult and call names. And even though he might be right, I don't know if he is, even though he might be smarter, which he may be, I don't know, but he's certainly not more developed, because the way that the other debater, the one that in my opinion did a much better job, the way that he even responded to these attacks were calm and cool, and he refused to stoop down to the other guy's level. He didn't engage in the silly he kept on using language like, we both want the same thing. I want what you want. I don't think that your ideas are wrong. I think that they're difficult to implement, and there's easier things to implement. And he kept on using the kind of language that someone that is developed, that is evolved, that is more conscious, that has that you know that that is confident in themselves and their ideas, to the extent that other people expressing other ideas is not a threat that needs to be ripped apart. It's interesting food for thought that would require assessing and breaking down, and if it's a good idea, it's a good idea, and if it's not, it's not as much, it's not as good of an idea. But so I think that is another area where people get confused, where and myself included, where I say, I'll be like, wow, I learned so much the last couple of weeks. I listened to so many great podcasts, so many great guests and historians and doctors and, and scientists and comedians and whoever it is, world leaders and politicians. And I learned so much, and then I come home, and I proudly, after having learned so much, I sit down and I ask my 8-month pregnant wife with a straight face, can you grab me something since you're standing? And I'd be like, what am I doing? Like, no, man, she's tired, and, and I just got back from teaching, and and she was with our 2-year-old, for the last 4 hours, trying to help him get ready for bed, and pick him up from school and get dinner ready, and is 8 months pregnant, and I'm like, all the information in the world that I could have learned this week does not matter if I'm not a developed enough person to say, just because I'm tired and I work today too, doesn't mean that I should make her get up, and I should make her get me that cup of water or that coffee or that snack or whatever it was. And I catch myself doing it all the time. I'm so far from a perfect person. um so far it hurts. And and similarly, I think the last two that I want to talk about, at least for now, the last two commonly misunderstood and misinterpreted phenomenons are the combination of discipline and creativity. And I think discipline, just by definition, means to not come up with excuses and be consistent. As in, if you're disciplined, it doesn't make a difference whether it's raining or not outside. It doesn't make a difference whether you went to bed early or late the night before. It doesn't make a difference whether your legs are sore or tired. you're going to go on that jog today. That's discipline. You're going to do it every day. Every day, you're going to practice guitar for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Every day, you're going to ask, ask 3 personal questions to your wife and child. I'm talking to myself now. And, and to be disciplined about that, right? And most people that are disciplined kind of expect that a lot of times to replace creativity. And I think that creativity just it's a very hard word to define. I think that it's probably best described as self-expression. Creativity is self-expression through individual associations, right? So I have my own associations with a guitar, and I look at an acoustic guitar, and hear, I might hear Bob Dylan and Van Morrison and Bruce Springsteen maybe playing an acoustic set, or the Grateful Dead playing an acoustic set in the early '70s. Um, and actually in 1970 they went on. They used to tour. They used to do half the tour was acoustic, half the tour was electric, and and so all my associations looking at the guitar are that, and someone else is looking at the guitar and seeing Irish folk music and bluegrass music and Billy Strings, and I don't look at my guitar and I don't think that, and our creativity is developed and enhanced based on our ability to express it, whether it's words, whether it's writing, whether it's art, whether it's filmmaking, whether it's pictures, whether it could be it could be really kind of anything that is external to our brains, and creativity it gives us a sense of satisfaction. It gives us a sense of having built something unique, something that no one else could do, something that is a physical manifestation of a little part of us that we're really, really proud of. And people say, oh, yeah, I'm either creative or, and they don't use the word discipline necessarily, but creatives are not associated with being disciplined, because creativity could strike like lightning. It could strike extremely quickly, and you don't know where it came from, and it just comes out and great, But you need to be principled about a creative process that will help you feel that way, right? So, um, for example, putting time aside every day to write, at least for me, it has been, it's something that my creativity suffers if I'm not disciplined about it. If I don't find if I don't find ways and methods and mechanics and time to sit down and actually get it, to actually write for 10 minutes, and not just write about what I'm feeling, but try to get very detailed, try to get a lot of images, try to get a lot of freestanding associations, things that I wouldn't ordinarily think would go together, but somehow do, either based on something that happened in my life, or a story, or something that I watched, or something that I read, or something someone told me once before, and to kind of just mesh it together, and to put it together to create a new life that you can be proud of. And this could happen, and this could happen in business settings. This could happen. That's how we get industry disruptors. That's how we get people that are financial wizards, or economists or psychologists, or anyone that really makes any kind of breakthroughs. These breakthroughs come through a combination of discipline and creativity, hard work, and a new perspective that only you could have thought of because of your experience in your life, and that no one else would have been able to come up with. You were exclusively the only one that was able to change the world because of the combination of your experiences, and then you're putting it to hard work and being disciplined about it. So, talked about interconnectedness. We talked about interconnectedness on a large global scale, which would be, universal principles and guidelines that are really useful. We talked about our own personal lives, how there's interconnectedness and different personality traits that kind of like shoot their way through everything we do in our lives. And the more we step back and try to look at ourselves and observe it ourselves, the more we see, or the better and more clearly we're able to see what that kind of philosophy or trait or perspective is. A lot of times it boils down just to one word: fear, rejection, need for love, acceptance. And that just one word kind of shoots through everything that we do. Then we talked about learning and development, the difference between accumulating information and actually actually developing your personality and growing your personality and evolving and becoming more sophisticated and conscious and responsible. And then discipline and creativity, the notions that you got to work hard, and you have to look at things and come up with ideas in a way that only you could, because you're the only one that lives your life. No one else can come up with these ideas for you. And to really take that kind of personal association and based on your experience, and to really build something beautiful with it, is really like the it's the most beautiful thing in the entire world. So we'll call it here. Just some food for thought today, and we'll have more episodes for you back next week. See you guys later. Looking forward.